Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, and thanks very much for the opportunity to contribute to this fantastic conversation about New Zealand's design identity. This morning I'd like to just very quickly run through three themes as fuel for thinking from our work about a discussion around New Zealand's identity and DNA. The first is a spirit of being up for it. Secondly, is diversity is very deep-seated in New Zealand. It's in our culture, and it's also very deeply in our biodiversity and our nature, and what's the linkage between that? And thirdly, from simplicity to a sophisticated simplicity in our design. So let's just talk about a spirit of being up for it. And I think you can't divorce or separate the culture from the design and the spirit of being a New Zealander. I think it's a really important part of the conversation. So I am going to show you a map of New Zealand from space though. You know, it is part of our uniqueness, and if you look at our geography, we range from the subtropical in the north to the sub-Antarctic in the south, Nemo fish in the north of the island, penguins in the bottom. And people that we've spoken to in our research talk about being in New Zealand, you have a spiritual freedom, and that's created from our geography. We see no boundaries, only horizons, and that gives us space to think, and it gives us wriggle room, and there's something great in that. Someone said it's bloody fantastic to be a New Zealander. You have a great capacity to live life like you want to. This is very cliched, and I totally agree with David about that piece describing New Zealand's character being cringeworthy, and we need to move beyond that. But it's been very interesting how often people observing New Zealand talk about this quality about ourselves, from the famous British journalist Bernard Levin to just last year Elizabeth Colbert, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, talking about New Zealand's attempts to kill all our mammal species in the New Yorker. And they talk about us not being shackled by tradition or history, that we're not limited by established thinking, and that carries over into a cultural aspect about ourselves and the spirit of everyone being up for something and giving it a go. You know, Steve Smith, who is one of the founders and chief winemakers at Craggy Range Vineyard, talked about this attitude. You know, we don't listen to people who say, no, you can't do that. We say, bugger off, you know. And he said that's what has led to the creation of New Zealand's wine industry going from nowhere to somewhere within a generation. There's also this attitude of, you know, I'm it. Someone sort of said, you know, it's really great whenever I get rung by people from offshore offices and they ask, can I speak to your vice president of marketing or global this or that, and you have to go, actually, I'm it. I'm the person that's on the ground. We're generalists, not specialists, and most of us have been that for a large part of our lives. Someone also said, I like to think of New Zealanders as being the little bird on the back of the rhinoceros. You know, we can use the global technology and resources to, you know, perform well on a world stage from here. There is this sense that we're not laid back, that our life is, you know, incredibly active, and there are a lot of New Zealanders that are doing exceptionally well internationally. Someone we spoke to was the global head of marketing for a very large sportswear brand, a Kiwi, and she said, I often wonder how on earth did this little Kiwi end up being this person with this very big job. And she said, I always say to myself, you know what, no matter how much I stuff up or how bad it gets, I can still go back and live on a New Zealand beach and life is still going to be pretty good. And she talked about that giving us a fearlessness of, you know, and risk-taking, because we have the safety net of the country that we've grown up in. So we talk about a spirit of being up for it. Someone said there are no barriers or preconceptions of what you can do in New Zealand. Rather an expectation that big opportunities will come out of doing things differently. Secondly, I'd like to talk about diversity as in our nature, and I think you know, decades of studying have talked about how diversity enhances creativity. A piece of work that's recently been done talks about how even being exposed to diversity can change the way you think in a positive way. So when we talk about cultural diversity, it increases knowledge and innovation and the capacity of human systems to change and adapt. in our biodiversity, and it's the ecosystem health and the resilience that serves as a protection from environmental shocks and from stresses. So let's look at this in a New Zealand context. We are super diverse. There's lots of talk about super diversity now, and that means that 25% of your population is comprised of ethnic migrants. But in Auckland, Professor Paul Spoonley is talking about the next study that will come out will show Auckland as being the most ethnically diverse city in the world, with 40% of its population of ethnic migration. We are a global diversity hotspot. We had the pleasure of listening to a wonderful scientist, Professor Bill Lee, talk at the Environmental Defence Society conference in Auckland this year, and his topic was, why does diversity matter? And he was talking about hyperdiversity and just the extreme amount of species that we have in a few square kilometres. And, you know, scientists talking about New Zealand being the closest thing you can get to life on another planet. Steve Smith talks about New Zealand being the United Nation of soils, and that enables us to create a wonderful versatility and divergence of wine, which is totally unexpected from this country. And he said, you know, there's a notion that we're simple and small, but he said it's not that at all. We're actually very complex and diverse when it comes to our soils. So diversity is in our nature. A lovely young Pākehā woman that we spoke to talked about this in the sense that Maori and Pacific, it's not what I am, but it's part of who I am as a New Zealander. And I think increasingly we're going to see, I think we're in the midst of a lot of change when it comes to embracing and expressing our biculturalism and also eventually our multiculturalism. I'm going to zoom through the last section because I'm out of time, but the third point I want to make is moving a shift from simple to sophisticated simplicity. I think there's a sense that with Kiwiana we kind of have a nostalgic fondness for all that stuff, but there's certainly a view that it doesn't reflect who we are anymore. You know, the next generation don't even know what number 8 fencing wire is, they call it number 4. You know, people say, she'll be right is wrong. You know, we need to make it right. So we see this as a sophisticated shift in simplicity. You know, from number 8 fencing wire to the extraordinary excluder predator-proof fences, which are now being sold in New Zealand, the Azores and Hawaii. From the humble batch to the sophistication of the hut on sleds, designed by Ken Crossan, which has just won a global gong for Best Small House and the Oscars Architectural Awards. You know, from the great old Holden with the tinny on the roof to the amphibious genius of sea legs. We all know the wool to the wonderful work that Icebreaker has been doing with merino wool. And finally, from Manuka scrub to the incredible power of Manuka honey and the global new gold rush, our exporting gold rush. In the Coromandel we heard just recently that the gangs there have switched from growing marijuana to Manuka honey because it's far more lucrative. In many senses, it's never been a better time to be a New Zealand brand or give a New Zealand take on a global trend. And these two New Zealand brands, More Porks and I Love Ugly, were named as two brands that are doing exceptionally well and that are dope, the dopest New Zealand brands in Australasia. Finally, we don't do old world luxury, but we know how to live incredibly well. And someone talked about, you know, they find the idea of luxury a massive turn-off. When they think of luxury, they think of Dubai, gold-plated taps, expensive extreme wealth. And they say, you know, in New Zealand we're not really into that, but we're very much into living well. And I think it's interesting that Hooker Lodge has been consistently held up as one of the best lodges in the world. Its roots were in a humble fishing lodge, but actually it has you know, raised itself to a level of incredible sophistication and of great appeal to you know, international visitors that can afford it. So finally, just sophisticated simplicity. New Zealand's not about luxury in a material sense, it's about the simple things in life done exceptionally well. And there's sophistication in that combination of simplicity, quality and authenticity. Thank you.